the American novel's strength? It lives and breathes with the culture rather than above it. It tells us who controls history, who gets to be seen, and whose lives are worth rendering in full. Stick with me and we'll see how those 250 years read. 25 books and one argument running through it like a river. Because the American novel has never been a polite conversation. It's always been a battle over who gets to be heard and who gets to be called an American. In this episode, we'll follow this fight and read America's unresolved argument in book form. Our 25 novels will tell an American story, so listen closely to its rhythms as we go through the centuries of social and racial divides. And look to new movements like modernism and postmodernism that keep breaking form to answer who gets to be called an American. Reading these 25 selections will tell you about the American novel and every major phase of the Republic. Our first novel lays the sentimentalist groundwork for how America's biggest tragedy, slavery, is discussed in the 19th century. But it's not about slavery. It's widely claimed to be the first American novel. The book is William Hill Brown's The Power of Sympathy from 1789, an epistolary novel about the scandalous passions between lovers Thomas Harrington and Harriet Fawcett. Their affair does not go well, and for those young women who read the book then, it's a lesson against straying outside marriage's boundaries. So, The Power of Sympathy shows us a couple of things. That sentimentality and moral instruction are the foundation of our literary tradition, and that being a promiscuous young lady leads to inevitable death. We'll see elements of this groundwork through the next several hundred years. While later novels return to sentimentalism, Herman Melville's Moby-Dick represents a break from this tradition. And according to future critics, it could be America's first modernist novel. You can find this influence on the American novel across more than 800 pages of meandering. The novel truly soars in parts where it reveals the consequences of global industry and the impact on nature. Its heavy, dark symbolism forms a bridge from America's Puritan roots to some genuinely innovative existential metaphors. But also, notice who's aboard the Pequod, the ship, a multiracial crew who work beside white men at a time when the country battles over race. Melville interrupts the trajectory of the American novel to represent a crew who looks more like the nation and the world than the country imagines. Moral outrage characterized the American novel of the early to mid-19th century. Few novels were larger than Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was the second best-selling book of the 19th century, only losing out to the Bible. Its popular abolitionist stance is said to have prompted Abraham Lincoln's remark to Stowe, "So, you're the little woman who wrote the book that made this great war." It had a huge impact on American culture, but it was mainly written for white readers to feel sympathy. This made Uncle Tom's Cabin politically essential, but culturally incomplete. One popular genre in the abolitionist tradition was called the tragic mulatto, and a now famous book within that genre is often called the first novel written by a Black American. William Wells Brown had escaped slavery. In 1853, he published Clotel, or The President's Daughter, and he published that in London. His protagonist is the fictional daughter of Thomas Jefferson and an enslaved woman. And where Stowe asks readers for sympathy, Brown makes readers see what slavery has actually done. You may not have heard about Clotel, but it was an important cornerstone in American literature at that time. By the late 19th century, we reached the most argued over book in American literature. Can you guess what it is? Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. It revolutionized the literature of American vernacular and, quote unquote, regular people. But it's also been banned, condemned, and praised in equal measure. This book not only shaped much of later American literature, but is a direct antecedent to a major novel in our own 21st century. We'll get to that later. Twain shows something radical in this book. Huck and Jim, white and black people, on a raft escaping from society and becoming friends. This moral core becomes so strong that Huck eventually decides that he'd rather go to hell than betray his friend. What makes this decision so powerful is that Huck actually believes in the consequences. This is the novel's real climax, but it continues from there. The story doesn't quite make it all the way after that. Twain turns Huck's quest to free Jim into a comedic twist that ignores its better trajectory. And Huck turns a serious motive into a prank on Jim. That's right, Twain flinched just as he got to the edge of a revolutionary point, which is why I am going to leave this book right here in my eyesight, because in 140 years, someone else will pick up this story and they don't flinch. Our next novel disappeared when it was first published in 1899. According to critic Margot Cully, editor of the Norton Critical Edition, reviews at the time consistently deemed it immoral. It wasn't until many decades later that it was recovered. Our last novel of the 19th century is Kate Chopin's The Awakening. I initially read this in high school and it blew my mind. Chopin's novel speaks to the moralizing tradition of the early American novel, or maybe against it. And it has many descendants. Among those novels is Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, and even Morrison's Beloved. Both books feature female liberation at their core, and The Awakening is at the heart of that shift in their tradition. I've mentioned Charles Chestnut's The Marrow of Tradition in several past episodes. I'll raise it again because it's such a profound expression of historical racial tensions. The story is inspired by a coup that overthrew the multiracial government of Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. Estimates of the dead range from dozens to as many as 300. Thousands were driven out, and Black owned homes and businesses were burned. This book is Chestnut's starkest and most urgent argument for social justice in the South, and it also bears witness to the effort to undo Reconstruction's gains. Like other novels on this list, Upton Sinclair's 1906 novel, The Jungle, takes on a major national issue. Sinclair meant to expose the brutal conditions of Chicago's meatpacking industry forced on immigrant workers. Instead, readers fixed on the severed fingers and demanded regulation. As Sinclair said, he aimed at the public's heart and instead hit its stomach. Side note, this is another book that I read in high school, and it was also the single biggest reason for mass appetite loss for encased meats in Miss Williams' American Literature class. The novel is also in direct conversation with Melville. Like him, Sinclair notes that labor is always at the cost of someone else's body. When the century's first half is discussed in English classes, it's usually done in terms of modernism and the Depression. I've done this myself when I teach. But this framing neglects the century's textures and unique voices. The following novels represent at least three distinct lanes, often in argument with one another. William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury tells the story of an old, crumbling family, the Compsons, whose disintegration parallels the South's own decline. Told through four perspectives, it's a stream of consciousness style that produces some of the most difficult and opaque prose in American literary history. But this approach may most honestly portray a world, according to Yeats, that cannot hold its center. But notice who narrates this book: a disabled man, a Southerner who's lost his faith in his family in the South, a bitter and broken man, and also Dilsey, a black woman who takes on the final section of the family's collapse. Faulkner's writing style takes on their interiority and insists their voice is worth representing. Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God is almost the opposite of Faulkner's prose. She renders her characters' lives with an almost anthropological clarity, writing that approaches life as it is. It's a sincere, loving portrayal of Black love, Black speech, and Black life as literature. No need for high modernism's pretenses. Aside from dialect, the representation in the book is very straightforward. Next, John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath narrates the Joad family's travels from the Oklahoma Dust Bowl in the West. On the way, they discover that the oldest American myth, land and opportunity, has been closed to them. This is a long novel, or at least I remember it feeling like one. It's a pretty amazing depiction of life during the time. Steinbeck's empathetic writing really shows up in the proletarian realism of poverty during the Depression. The novel's realism is closest to Hurston's in style. In the American protest novels tradition, Richard Wright's native son is a warning to America. If the current tension between white and black people persists, the nation faces an escalating danger to both black and white. The protagonist, Bigger Thomas, runs afoul of the law. He learns that he's both monster and a product of his environment. James Baldwin said, "This novel's protest went far, but not far enough." Ann Petry's The Street is the first book by a black woman to reach the 1 million copy mark. It follows a mother, Ludi Johnson, and her son, Bub. They're trying to make it in Harlem by themselves, but every door is closed before them. At such an early period in the century, this book is remarkable in its portrayal of a black woman's life and her battle against hard living on her block. It's not that Ludi can't win, it has more to do with the street itself, built to stop her. Next is another novel about protest that anticipates the civil rights era's struggles. It's Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. He features an unnamed narrator from the South who's propelled to New York, and he gets caught up in social upheaval. Every ideology from white liberal to communist wants him as a symbol, but he figures out eventually what he wants. He begins to understand his own invisibility. This is his plight. His own self has disappeared and he's been remade into a function of other people's ideas. James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain shows readers through a 14-year-old boy the interior life of a young person who has inherited parents' histories he doesn't understand. He also doesn't actually know their backstories, but he carries their burden through father, family, and church. Baldwin's approach to the questions of the time is not to turn to structural causes like our previous novels, but to examine the cost to his mind. Baldwin has some of the most beautiful writing in American letters, and it's featured here in this novel. The road novel is an American archetype, and so are the main characters, Sal and Dean, in Jack Kerouac's On the Road. The story follows two men as they search for unconstrained lives on America's romantic open roads. While the novel itself is not particularly well written, it represents a powerful Americana that has engrossed young white men for decades, including myself. Hidden underneath the prose is an atmosphere that knows the open road is only open to a few, but that the characters actually know. I've discussed Thomas Pynchon's The Crying Loud of 49 in a previous video, and I'll tell you that for this spot, you can probably swap out Gravity's Rainbow, which is another of his novels, but it is definitely a more difficult one. But for our purposes, The Crying of Lot 49 speaks directly to On the Road's romanticism by showing readers the architecture and paranoia of that fantasy. The main character, Oedipus, keeps chasing shadows in the dispossessed figures hidden in a secretive system beneath a surface world. So while On the Road alludes to an unrepresented America, Pynchon writes them into his narrative and points to a whole country left out of the American fantasy. Maxine Hong Kingston's Woman Warrior is a hybrid novel. Is it a memoir? Is it a novel? Is it mythology? Yes. Kingston uses all of these forms to make a point that Chinese American women whose voices are silenced must find ways to communicate beyond a single medium. So, through metaphor, reference, and implication, she makes the case about being caught in two cultures. This, she seems to say, is where America is built. Kingston and Toni Morrison are linked by mythology and separation in Morrison's Song of Solomon. Morrison's protagonist is Milkman Dead, a man who searches for prosperity, and instead he finds heritage, legacy, and flight. The novel asks about the cost of this newfound freedom and this newfound flight. Is it freedom when a person who escapes and who must be made whole must leave others behind? Morrison explores these questions through folk traditions to pose larger dilemmas about community. I've discussed this novel in the past episode, so I won't spend too long here. Leslie Marmon Silko's Ceremony follows a hurt and damaged veteran, Tayo. He learns to heal through folk ritual and story. He reclaims a sense of his own survival by rediscovering the creative and productive forces of his heritage. The next book, The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, is also a hybrid style. Her book represents what occurred in the American novel during this time. Writers expanded the definition of who and what is an American. Sandra Cisneros' The House on Mango Street follows a young girl, Esperanza Cordero, through her neighborhood in Chicago. Her poetic language strings together moments from her early life to build a greater sense of community from all of these smaller elements. With a small leap forward into the 90s, this era of novels was known for taking stock of the beliefs, memories, and histories that shaped America. In fact, writers innovated by primarily recomposing and reviewing how they arrived at their current circumstances. This is where we find Don DeLillo. His big novel, Underworld, is a mosaic of nostalgia and memory about baseball, the Cold War, and trash. These are also the ideas that hold together DeLillo's narrative structure. Through it all, the threat of nuclear war persists and, ironically, holds together a world that's fraying at the edges. Edward P. Jones rewrites slavery in the known world by showing real-life circumstances of Black slaveholding in the Old South. But this really isn't Jones's point. Closer to DeLillo, he shows how ambient fear and oppression both hold this world together and poison it. The story pieces together a history of America that is deeply uncomfortable, And that's the point. After rereading Invisible Man, I was struck by how much of it I saw in Paul Beatty's The Sellout. The Sellout is a satire with a sharp and elongated punchline. The narrator argues before the Supreme Court for reinstating segregation to a Los Angeles suburb. Below that, however, is a question about the endurance of the civil rights movement. Has it actually produced a legacy that still promises social progress? Is this where we've been headed? Beatty reveals the contradictions between the past and an imaginary present that may actually not be so imaginary. Remember that Twain made Jim one of the most important figures in American literature. He gave him dialect, but not thought, loyalty, but not independence, and a heart, but no story to tell about it. James by Percival Everett responds to this book 140 years later. Everett's James, not Jim, reverses the original account. James is educated and pursues great books. He speaks in dialect, but only as a method of code switching, which shows his expertise with two worlds at once. And perhaps most of all, Everett takes the ending where Twain didn't. Twain flinched, Everett doesn't. I recently picked up Huck Finn again because I wanted to see how Everett changed what we see when we reread that classic. And what I saw were American novels and a list that made this book and its argument possible. Yes, the American novel is a tradition, but it's also a conversation and a refusal to settle for old definitions, old hierarchies, and old ideas. It's a coming together of argument and friction, and it's an unresolved question about how this country sees itself and what it refuses to see. Brown, Chestnut, Hurston, Petrie, Ellison, Morrison, Silko, Kingston, Cisneros, Beatty, and Everett. These are writers who made a literature that lasts. And it's through that tradition that we see, re-see, and revise the shape of our country. Because the argument isn't finished. A literature that settles can never really see its own past. So this one refuses to settle. It keeps arguing. That's the American novel. Unfinished, on purpose, and still ours to write. Quick note for those of you concerned about a long list, I read these books over the course of my education and career, so for viewers who wish to read through this list, please take your time. It'll take a while. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Ben. This has been Tilting at Tomes.